My name is Blake. I'm 42 years old, and I never believed in monsters. I was a practical park ranger for the state wilderness outside Millbrook, Pennsylvania. That changed in October of 2021, when I came face to face with something that shouldn't exist in an abandoned church deep in the woods. I'm sitting here now, in my small apartment, the autumn evening light filtering through my windows, casting long shadows across the photography equipment scattered on my desk. Outside, I can hear the normal sounds of suburban life. Cars passing, kids playing, someone mowing their lawn. All the ordinary sounds of a world that makes sense. A world where the biggest predators have 4 legs and follow the laws of nature I learned in ranger training. But 3 years ago, I learned those laws have exceptions. Before I became a park ranger, I spent nearly a decade as a long-haul truck driver. I've seen every back road, every forgotten corner of rural Pennsylvania. I've encountered black bears, coyotes, even the occasional mountain lion that wasn't supposed to be there. I knew how to handle wildlife, how to read tracks, how to identify scat and territorial markings. My weathered hands had dealt with everything from injured hikers to rabid raccoons. I was methodical, observant, and most importantly, I was a skeptic. When locals would whisper about strange howls in the night or livestock found torn apart in ways that didn't match any known predator, I'd nod politely and file it under rural folklore. When hikers reported seeing something walking upright between the trees, something too big to be human, I'd explain how shadows and fear can play tricks on the mind. I had scientific explanations for everything. I carried a Remington 870 shotgun as part of my standard gear. 12-gauge pump action, reliable as sunrise. It was meant for putting down injured animals or scaring off aggressive bears. I never imagined I'd need it for something that would look back at me with amber eyes that held an intelligence no animal should possess. The encounter lasted maybe 10 minutes, but those 10 minutes shattered everything I thought I knew about what's possible in these woods. They changed me from someone who explained away the impossible into someone who now checks his locks twice before bed and keeps that shotgun loaded beside his door. I've never told this story to my supervisors, never filed an official report, but I can't keep it locked inside anymore, because 3 years later, I still wake up some nights remembering those eyes watching me from the darkness of St. Bartholomew's Church. And I know, beyond any doubt, that there are things in these woods that science hasn't cataloged yet, things that hunt. The assignment that changed everything came from my supervisor in September 3 years ago. The Park Service had partnered with Wildlife Recovery Quarterly for a feature on how nature reclaims abandoned human structures, documenting deer bedding in collapsed barns, bird colonies in defunct grain silos. The magazine wanted images from Pennsylvania's forgotten places, and I was the ranger with photography experience. St. Bartholomew's Church appeared on my survey list almost by accident. Built in 1923, abandoned since 1987 when the congregation dwindled to nothing. The property sat untouched for decades. Prime territory for wildlife corridors. My contact at the magazine mentioned local reports of increased deer activity, possible black bear denning sites, even rumors of a small wolf population returning to the area. I spread the topographical maps across my desk, tracing the route with my finger. The church sat in a natural valley surrounded by dense forest that connected to state game lands, perfect habitat for large mammals. My camera equipment gleamed under the desk lamp. Canon 5D Mark IV, telephoto lens, external flashes. Everything I'd need to document Pennsylvania's wilderness reclaiming consecrated ground. The research photos I'd gathered showed a beautiful stone structure. Gothic windows reaching toward heaven, even as ivy pulled the walls back toward earth. Weathered headstones dotted the overgrown cemetery behind the building. It looked like something from a nature documentary about European ruins, not rural Pennsylvania. What excited me most was the ecological story. Abandoned churches often became wildlife sanctuaries precisely because people avoided them. Superstition created conservation by accident. I'd photographed similar sites across 3 states, always finding remarkable biodiversity in places humans considered haunted or cursed. The drive would take 40 minutes from my apartment, then a 2-mile hike on an old logging road. I planned to spend the golden hour photographing the exterior, then return with camping gear for a full weekend shoot. The magazine was paying well for exclusive images, and I could already envision the cover story. Sacred spaces, wild places. I loaded fresh batteries into my equipment, checked memory cards, packed my telephoto lens for wildlife shots. October light would be perfect. That warm, slanted illumination that made everything look ethereal. The church would photograph beautifully against the autumn foliage. Looking back now, I remember feeling that particular excitement photographers get when they know they're on to something special. A story waiting to be told. A place that would reveal its secrets to the right observer. I had no idea how literal that would prove to be. I scheduled the shoot for the following Tuesday, when weather reports promised clear skies and perfect visibility. I should have listened to the locals instead. The warnings started the moment I mentioned St. Bartholomew's to anyone in town. At Murphy's Diner, the waitress, a tough-looking woman who'd probably seen everything, actually took a step back when I showed her the location on my map. "You don't want to go there, hun," she said, refilling my coffee with shaking hands. Not with what's been happening. What had been happening, according to the locals, was a string of dog attacks over the past 2 years. 3 hikers had gone missing on trails leading to the old church. When search teams found what was left of 2 of them, the official reports blamed black bears, or possibly a pack of feral dogs. But the bartender at O'Malley's told a different story over my beer that night. "Dogs don't tear a man's throat out and leave the rest untouched," he whispered, glancing around nervously. "And they sure as hell don't walk on 2 legs." I remember rolling my eyes at that one. Classic rural folklore. Take a few predator encounters, add some isolation and superstition, and suddenly you've got yourself a monster. As a park ranger, I'd heard it all before. Every unexplained death became a Bigfoot sighting. Every aggressive bear turned into some supernatural beast. The gas station attendant was the most insistent. When I stopped for supplies before the hike, he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. His eyes were bloodshot, like he hadn't slept in days. "I seen it," he hissed. 3 weeks ago, crossing Route 34 near the church road. Bigger than any wolf, walking upright like a man, eyes that glowed in my headlights. I gently pulled free, offering my most reassuring smile. "Probably just a black bear. They can appear much larger in headlights, especially when they rear up on their hind legs." He stared at me like I was the crazy one. Bears don't have yellow eyes that look right through your soul. Even now, sitting here 3 years later, I can still see the frustration on that man's face. He was trying to save my life, and I dismissed him like he was some backwoods fool spinning tall tales. The irony isn't lost on me. I spent my entire career identifying wildlife, explaining away monster sightings with scientific facts. I was the expert who debunked the myths, the voice of reason in a world full of superstition. I was so goddamn sure I knew better. The drive to St. Bartholomew's started normal enough. My Park Service pickup handled the main forest road just fine, but as I followed the coordinates deeper into the Pennsylvania wilderness, the asphalt gave way to gravel, then to rutted dirt, barely wide enough for one vehicle. October maples blazed orange and red overhead, their leaves drifting down like confetti across my windshield. I'd made this kind of trip hundreds of times as a ranger, documenting wildlife recovery in remote areas, cataloging how nature reclaimed abandoned human spaces. The church had been empty since 1987, making it perfect for studying undisturbed animal corridors. My Remington 870 sat locked in its rack behind me, standard equipment for backcountry work. The truck lurched through one final pothole before I reached the trailhead, really just a widening in the track where I could park without blocking the path. I killed the engine and stepped out into crisp autumn air that carried the earthy smell of decomposing leaves and distant wood smoke. Loading my gear took 10 minutes. Camera equipment, extra batteries, measuring tape, sample bags, everything I'd need for a thorough wildlife survey. The pack settled heavy across my shoulders, familiar weight that reminded me of my trucking days when I'd haul cargo by hand. My Timberland boots found solid purchase on the packed earth trail. The hike to St. Bartholomew's was supposed to take about 40 minutes through old-growth forest that had never been logged. Shafts of golden afternoon light slanted between massive oak and pine trunks, creating a cathedral effect that made me understand why early settlers had built a church out here. The beauty was undeniable. Filtered sunlight illuminating spider webs heavy with dew, chipmunks skittering through the underbrush, the distant tap-tap-tap of a woodpecker working dead timber. I'd walked maybe half a mile when my boots started crunching through deeper leaf litter. The sound was satisfying, rhythmic, almost meditative. This was why I'd left long-haul trucking, to spend my days in places like this instead of behind a steering wheel on endless interstates. My radio crackled with static as I moved deeper into the forest, the signal weakening as trees closed in around me. Standard procedure was to check in every hour, but I wasn't worried. I knew these woods, understood how to read terrain and weather. Whatever stories the locals told about this place, I was confident my ranger training and practical experience would keep me safe. The trail curved ahead, disappearing into shadows that seemed darker than they should have been for mid-afternoon. About 20 minutes into my hike, I found myself crouched beside a muddy patch where yesterday's rain had left the earth soft and impressionable. What stopped me cold wasn't the track itself at first. I'd seen plenty of animal prints in my years as a ranger. But as I knelt down for a closer look, my professional confidence started to crack. The print was massive, easily 6 inches across at the pad, with 4 distinct toe marks pressed deep into the dark soil. What made my stomach tighten wasn't the size alone. I'd documented black bear tracks before. It was the claws, 3-inch gouges extended beyond each toe print, carved into the earth like someone had dragged a handful of knives through the mud. I pulled out my measuring tape, the metal clicking as it extended. The stride length between prints measured nearly 4 feet. My mind raced through possibilities. Black bear? Wrong shape entirely, too narrow, too elongated. The heel pad was all wrong, more canine than ursine. But no dog breed I knew could leave a print this size. The damp earth smell filled my nostrils as I leaned closer, noting how deep the impressions went. Whatever made these tracks had to weigh at least 300 pounds, maybe more. The claw marks weren't just scratches either. They were deliberate gouges, like the creature had been digging or gripping for traction. I grabbed my camera and started documenting, adjusting the lens to capture the scale. Through the viewfinder, the tracks looked even more unsettling. The spacing suggested a bipedal gait, but the shape screamed predator. My hands, steady from years of handling equipment in all conditions, started to tremble slightly as I worked. Just misidentified bear tracks, I muttered, but the words felt hollow. I'd studied wildlife tracking extensively during my ranger certification. These didn't match anything in my field guides. I found 3 more prints heading deeper into the woods, each one perfectly preserved in the soft ground. They followed the same trail I was taking, straight towards St. Bartholomew's Church. The last print showed something that made my blood run cold. The toes were splayed wide, claws fully extended like whatever made it had suddenly stopped and turned to look back down the trail, back toward where I now stood. I straightened up, my Dickies work shirt suddenly feeling too tight across my chest. The forest around me seemed different now, less welcoming. Every shadow between the trees could be hiding something watching me with intelligent eyes. Something that left tracks like these. I stopped walking about a mile into the trail, my weathered hands gripping the shotgun slung over my shoulder. Something was wrong. The forest had gone dead silent. In my years as a ranger, I'd learned to read the woods like a book. There should have been chatter from chickadees, the rustle of squirrels in the canopy, maybe a woodpecker hammering somewhere in the distance. Instead, nothing. Even the October breeze that had been stirring the leaves seemed to have died completely. I checked my watch. 4:30 p.m. Plenty of daylight left, but the silence pressed against my eardrums like I was underwater. My own breathing sounded unnaturally loud, each footstep on the leaf litter echoing too sharp in the stillness. This wasn't normal. Animals went quiet for 3 reasons: severe weather approaching, a major predator in the area, or something so fundamentally wrong that every living thing with sense had either fled or gone into hiding. The sky was clear, no storm clouds anywhere. That left the other 2 options. I'd dealt with bears, mountain lions, even aggressive elk during my ranger years. Hell, I'd handled plenty of sketchy situations during my trucking days too. But this felt different. The silence had weight to it, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I unslung my Remington 870, checking that a shell was chambered. The metallic click of the action seemed to boom in the dead air. Whatever had spooked every bird and small mammal in a square-mile radius, I wanted to be ready for it. My radio crackled with static when I tried to raise the station. The signal had been weakening steadily since I'd entered this valley. The terrain was playing hell with reception. I clipped it back to my belt and kept moving. Slower now, more deliberate. The trail curved ahead into a stand of old oaks, their branches creating a canopy so thick it dimmed the afternoon light. I paused at the edge of that natural tunnel, scanning for movement, listening for any sound that might explain the oppressive quiet. Nothing, not even the buzz of insects. My heart was beating harder now, and I could feel sweat starting despite the cool October air. Years of ranger training told me to trust my instincts, and every instinct I had was screaming that something was very, very wrong in these woods. But St. Bartholomew's was still a mile ahead, and I had a job to do. I adjusted my grip on the shotgun and stepped into the shadows between the trees, my boots crunching too loud on the leaves in the unnatural silence. The trail opened into a clearing, and St. Bartholomew's Church rose before me like something from a Gothic nightmare. 3 decades of Pennsylvania weather had done their worst to the old stone structure. The slate roof sagged inward where support beams had rotted through, creating jagged holes that let in dying sunlight. Stained glass windows hung in broken fragments, their colored shards scattered across the overgrown grass like fallen jewels. I shifted my Remington to a more comfortable carry position and approached the main entrance. The heavy wooden doors hung askew on rusted hinges, one completely off its frame and leaning against the stone wall. Beyond them, darkness pooled thick as oil. The musty smell hit me first. Decades of decay, wet stone, and something else. Something animal. I pulled out my flashlight and swept the beam across the interior. Wooden pews lay, toppled and splintered, covered in layers of moldering leaves that had blown in through the broken roof. The altar stood intact but stained with water damage and what looked like claw marks gouged deep into the wood. Professional curiosity overrode my growing unease. I'd seen plenty of wildlife taking shelter in abandoned buildings during my trucking days. Bears, coyotes, even the occasional mountain lion. This was just another den site, nothing more. But as I circled the perimeter, documenting the damage with my camera for the survey report, I found more of those massive tracks. They led right up to the side entrance, where the door hung completely off its hinges. The stone threshold was scratched and worn as if something heavy had passed through repeatedly. Behind the church, an overgrown cemetery stretched into the tree line, weathered headstones tilted at odd angles, nearly swallowed by brambles and wild growth. The iron fence that once enclosed it had collapsed in several places, creating dark gaps between the rusted posts. I keyed my radio again. Base, this is Blake. Structure shows significant wildlife activity. Large predator tracks, possible denning behavior. Requesting backup for... Static answered me. Complete dead air. The mountains were playing hell on my signal, worse than I'd anticipated. I should have expected it in this valley. The shadows were lengthening fast, and that unnatural silence still pressed down on everything. Every ranger instinct I'd developed screamed at me to mark this location and return with backup in the morning. But I had a job to finish. I approached the gaping side entrance, flashlight in one hand, shotgun ready in the other. Whatever was using this place as a den, I needed to identify it before some hiker stumbled into trouble. I approached the main window where colored glass fragments still clung to the stone frame like broken teeth. The interior lay shrouded in shadow, but I could make out overturned pews and debris scattered across what remained of the floor. My ranger training kicked in. Document everything. Assess the situation methodically. I raised my heavy-duty flashlight and swept the beam across the church's interior. The light revealed claw marks gouged deep into wooden pews, far too large and aggressive for any black bear. Something had been using this place as a den, and recently. The musty smell of decay mixed with something else, something animal and wild that made my nose wrinkle. Moving closer to the window, I peered deeper into the shadows. The silence outside remained absolute. No wind, no birds, nothing. Even my own breathing seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. That's when I saw them. Two amber-yellow eyes, glowing like hot coals in the darkness roughly 7 feet off the ground. They weren't reflecting my flashlight beam. They seemed to generate their own internal fire. For a heartbeat, we stared at each other across the broken threshold. My blood turned to ice water. No bear's eyes sat that high off the ground. No wolf, no mountain lion. Nothing in these Pennsylvania woods should have eyes at that elevation unless it was standing upright like a man. I blinked hard, certain I was seeing things. When I looked again, the eyes had vanished completely. Just empty darkness where they'd been burning a second before. My hands started trembling as I gripped the Remington tighter. Every rational explanation I had used to dismiss the locals' warnings crumbled in that instant. Whatever had made those massive tracks, whatever was stalking through these woods, was inside that church, and it was tall enough to look me straight in the eye. The smart thing would have been to back away immediately, radio for backup from higher ground, approach this systematically. But those eyes, there'd been an intelligence behind them that froze me in place. Not the blank stare of a wild animal, but something aware. Something that had been watching me just as intently as I'd been trying to observe it. Something that knew exactly what I was. That's when the sound hit me. A low, rumbling growl rolled out from the depths of the church. But it wasn't like any animal vocalization I'd ever heard in my years working outdoors. It started deep, almost subsonic, vibrating through the stone walls and into my chest cavity like standing too close to a freight train. My ribs resonated with it. But then it shifted, rose in pitch, became something that made every hair on my arms stand straight up. It wasn't quite wolf. Wasn't quite human. It was something caught between the two, and that wrongness sent ice water through my veins. The growl echoed off the broken stone walls, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Above me, behind me, from the shadows pooling in the cemetery. The acoustic properties of the ruined church turned that horrible sound into a symphony of menace that surrounded me completely. My grip tightened on the Remington until my knuckles went white. Every instinct screamed at me to run to get to my truck and radio for backup, but my boots felt rooted to the ground. Years of ranger training, warred with millions of years of evolutionary programming that recognized the sound of an apex predator. The growl held for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 seconds. Then it cut off abruptly, leaving a silence that was somehow worse than the sound itself. The absence rang in my ears. My heart hammered against my ribs. Cold sweat broke out across my forehead despite the October chill. I could taste copper in my mouth. Fear pure and simple. Whatever was in that church, it knew I was here. That growl hadn't been random animal behavior or territorial posturing. It had been directed, intentional. A warning, maybe. Or a challenge. I took a half step backward, my Timberlands scraping against broken glass. The sound seemed deafeningly loud in the oppressive quiet. Through the shattered window frame, the interior of St. Bartholomew's gaped like a mouth full of broken teeth. Nothing moved in there now, but I could feel eyes on me, intelligent, calculating eyes that were weighing their options just like I was weighing mine. My radio crackled with static, making me nearly jump out of my skin. Still no signal in this dead zone. For a split second, I considered retreating to higher ground, trying to call it in. But what would I say? That I heard a scary noise in the woods? No. I was a park ranger. This was my job. Something inside the church responded to my movement with a low chuff of what almost sounded like amusement. I started backing away from the church. My Remington held steady despite the tremor in my grip. That's when I heard it. Heavy footsteps inside the building moving parallel to my retreat. Whatever was in there wasn't just reacting to my presence. It was tracking me. The footsteps weren't random. They matched my pace, staying directly opposite my position as I circled toward the cemetery side of the church. When I stopped, they stopped. When I moved left, the sounds shifted left. My ranger training screamed that this was predator behavior, but no animal I knew hunted with this kind of calculated precision. Through the broken windows, I caught glimpses of something massive moving in the shadows. A silhouette. Too broad, too high off the ground. Dark fur catching what little light filtered through the collapsed roof. Each time I tried to get a clear view, it melted back into the interior darkness, but I could feel those amber eyes tracking my every step. My breathing came in short, sharp bursts that seemed deafeningly loud in the unnatural quiet. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cooling October air. Every instinct told me to run, but my legs felt leaden, like I was moving through thick mud. The thing inside wasn't just following me, it was studying me. I heard the scrape of claws on stone, deliberate and measured. Not the frantic scrambling of a startled animal, but the purposeful movement of something that knew exactly what it was doing. The sound echoed off the church walls, making it impossible to pinpoint the creature's exact location. When I reached the corner of the building, the footsteps stopped entirely. The silence stretched until my heartbeat thundered in my ears. I pressed my back against the cold stone wall, shotgun raised, waiting for whatever was coming next. That's when I realized what was happening. The thing wasn't just stalking me, it was hurting me. Every time I'd tried to angle back toward the trail, those calculated movements had cut off my path, forcing me deeper into the cemetery grounds behind the church. I was being maneuvered like livestock, pushed exactly where this creature wanted me to go. The professional part of my mind cataloged the tactical intelligence on display, but the human part felt a cold dread settle in my gut. I wasn't dealing with some rabid dog or confused bear. This thing was thinking, planning, anticipating my moves before I made them. And it was winning. The footsteps inside stopped. I froze, shotgun aimed at the main entrance, my breath coming in short bursts. The silence stretched for maybe 30 seconds before I heard it. The creak of old hinges from somewhere I couldn't see. Not the front door, the side entrance. My blood turned to ice water. I pivoted toward the sound, boots crunching on broken glass. And that's when I saw it. Just a glimpse at first. Something massive moving behind the crumbling stone door frame on the church's north side. Dark fur. Too tall to be a bear, too broad to be human. Then it stepped into view. Jesus Christ. The thing stood maybe 20 feet away, partially concealed by the door frame, but clearly visible in the dying light. 7 feet tall, maybe 8, with a posture that defied everything I knew about anatomy. Bipedal, but hunched forward, like it was more comfortable on all fours. Its legs were wrong, bent backward at the ankles like a dog's. Massive clawed feet planted firmly on the stone steps. Shaggy dark fur covered its entire body, thick and wild like a wolf's winter coat. But the proportions were all nightmare logic. Shoulders broader than any linebacker's, arms that hung too long, ending in hands I couldn't quite make out in the shadows. The smell hit me then, musky, wild, like wet dog mixed with something else. Something predatory. It wasn't hiding anymore. The thing was letting me see it, studying me with the same intensity I'd used to track wounded deer, testing me. My hands shook as I kept the Remington trained on its center mass. Years of ranger training screamed at me to identify the species, catalog the threat, follow protocol. But my lizard brain knew better. This wasn't in any field guide. The creature shifted its weight, and I caught a better look at those legs. Digitigrade, like it was perpetually crouched on the balls of its feet. Built for explosive movement, built for hunting. It took one deliberate step toward me. Every thought I'd ever had about wildlife behavior, about apex predators, about the natural order of things, crumbled like the church's rotting timber. This thing moved with purpose. Intelligence. It wasn't just some oversized wolf or escaped zoo animal. It was something else entirely. And it was deciding what to do with me. I backed up slowly, finger on the trigger, trying to put distance between us while keeping it in sight. But deep down, I already knew the horrible truth. If this thing wanted me dead, my shotgun wouldn't stop it. That's when I understood I wasn't dealing with an animal. I was being hunted by something that could think. The realization hit me like ice water as I backed toward the cemetery, my Remington tight against my shoulder. Every time I moved left, I'd catch movement in my peripheral vision. Something large shifting position inside the church, staying parallel to me. When I angled right toward what I thought was an escape route, a low rumble would echo from that direction, warning me away. It was herding me, deliberately cutting off my path back to the trail. I spun around, scanning the tree line where the forest met the cemetery. Nothing. But when I turned back toward the church there, a massive shoulder sliding past a broken window, too coordinated to be coincidence. The thing was repositioning itself while I was distracted. My hands were shaking now, years of ranger training crumbling against something that shouldn't exist. Bears were predictable. Mountain lions followed patterns. This was strategy. The cemetery stretched behind me, weathered headstones, creating a maze of shadows in the dying light. Stone monuments that would slow me down, trap me between granite markers, while that thing circled around. I could feel it calculating, weighing options like a chess player studying the board. Another glimpse of movement, dark fur sliding between the church's broken doorframe and a collapsed section of wall. It was positioning itself between me and my only exit route. The message was clear. You're not leaving yet. A branch snapped somewhere behind the cemetery, then another, from a completely different direction. Jesus Christ. There might be more than one. The shadows between the headstones seemed to shift and breathe. Every weathered angel statue looked like a crouched figure. Every broken monument could hide something with glowing eyes and 3-inch claws. I was trapped in an open-air cage, and whatever was hunting me had all the time in the world to decide what came next. The practical part of my mind, the part that had kept me alive through years of wilderness work, screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere left to go. The thing in the church had made sure of that. Then the creature emerged fully from the church's side entrance, and I understood why it had been herding me here. The cemetery was its territory, its home ground, and it wanted me to see it clearly in the open where there could be no mistaking what I was facing. The creature stepped fully into the moonlight. 7.5 feet of impossible stood 20 yards away, studying me with those amber eyes that had haunted my peripheral vision. Its wolf-like head sat on a neck that stretched too far upright, like someone had taken a timber wolf and forced it to stand like a man. The elongated muzzle revealed rows of yellowed teeth, each one the size of my thumb, and its black lips pulled back in what wasn't quite a snarl. More like curiosity. Massive shoulders hunched forward, covered in shaggy dark fur that seemed to absorb the moonlight. Those digitigrade legs, bent backward like a dog's, supported its enormous frame with an unnatural grace. But it was the claws that made my breath catch. 3 inches of bone-white talons caught the silver light, curved and razor-sharp, extending from fingers that looked disturbingly human beneath all that fur. The Dogman, because that's what it was no matter how much my rational mind rejected the term, made no aggressive moves. It simply watched me with an intelligence that chilled me more than any growl could have. Those amber eyes tracked my every micro-movement, calculating, evaluating. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. My Remington 870 felt like a toy in my hands. 12-gauge shells that could drop a charging bear seemed laughably inadequate against this thing. My finger stayed on the trigger guard. Some distant part of my ranger training keeping me from making the fatal mistake of pointing a weapon at something that could probably rip my head off before I could blink. The creature's breath misted in the cold air, and I realized mine was doing the same. We stood there in the cemetery, 2 living beings acknowledging each other's existence in the darkness between the weathered headstones. The moment stretched impossibly long, filled with the weight of mutual recognition. It tilted its massive head, ears pricking forward like a German shepherd hearing a strange sound. That gesture, so canine, so familiar, somehow made everything worse. This wasn't some mindless beast. Behind those glowing eyes was a consciousness that understood exactly what I was, what I represented, and what threat I posed. The terror that had been building in my chest transformed into something else entirely. Awe, maybe, or respect. This creature could have killed me a dozen times over during our cat-and-mouse game through the ruins. Instead, it had revealed itself deliberately, allowing me to see it in full. A low rumble emanated from its chest. Not quite a growl, not quite a purr. Communication of some kind. The sound reverberated through my bones, and I found myself nodding slightly, though I couldn't have said why. The Dogman's gaze never left mine. In that stare, I glimpsed something ancient and wild, something that had watched these woods long before St. Bartholomew's Church was ever built. It was a guardian, a sentinel, and I was the intruder in its domain. But even as that thought formed, another one followed. The missing hikers. The bodies found torn apart. Whatever this creature was, intelligent, ancient, perhaps even worthy of respect, it had killed people. Maybe it distinguished between those who stumbled too close to its territory and those who kept their distance. Maybe those hikers had done something to provoke it. Or maybe this thing was simply a predator that chose its moments. I'd never know. And standing there in that moonlit cemetery, I realized I didn't want to find out which category I fell into. Time suspended itself between us, predator and prey, locked in perfect, terrifying understanding. We stared at each other across 15 feet of moonlit cemetery ground. The creature's massive chest rose and fell with measured breaths, vapor streaming from its elongated muzzle in the cold night air. Those amber eyes never blinked, never wavered from my face. My finger trembled on the shotgun's trigger, but something held me back. The creature wasn't snarling, wasn't advancing. It just watched me, studied me with an intelligence that made my skin crawl and my world view crumble simultaneously. Slowly, deliberately, I lowered the Remington's barrel toward the ground. The Dogman's ears twitched forward. Its wolf-like head tilted slightly, almost quizzically, and I swear I saw something like curiosity flicker in those glowing eyes. Not hunger, not aggression, curiosity. We were two intelligent beings, meeting for the first time. My heart hammered against my ribs as I let my free hand hang loose at my side. Not reaching for anything, just showing I wasn't a threat. The creature tracked my movement but remained motionless, its 3-inch claws glinting in the moonlight. Easy, I whispered more to myself than to it. Easy. The Dogman's ears swiveled toward my voice. Its massive shoulders shifted as it adjusted its hunched posture, and for one terrifying moment I thought it would charge. Instead, it took a single step backward, it giving me more space. It was being considerate. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This thing, this impossible, nightmarish creature, was showing restraint, showing intelligence, maybe even showing respect. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I slowly raised one weathered hand in what might have been a greeting, or a peace offering, or just the desperate gesture of a man whose rational mind had finally snapped. The Dogman's response nearly stopped my heart. It raised its own massive clawed hand in return. The movement was careful, controlled, unmistakably deliberate. A mirror of my gesture. We held that position for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Two creatures acknowledging each other across an impossible gulf of species and understanding. Then, without warning, the Dogman turned and melted back into the shadows between the cemetery headstones. One moment it was there, a towering presence of fur and muscle and otherworldly intelligence. The next it was gone, leaving only the whisper of movement through dead leaves and the lingering scent of something wild and ancient. I stood alone among the weathered grave markers, my shotgun hanging at my side, staring at the empty space where the impossible had just occurred. The forest sounds gradually returned, an owl hooting in the distance, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the normal chorus of a Pennsylvania night. Whatever presence had silenced the woods was gone, taking its unnatural quiet with it. I'd come here expecting to document wildlife recovery patterns. Instead, I discovered something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Not because it was a monster, but because it wasn't. Not entirely. And that made everything more complicated. I don't remember much of the run back to my truck. One moment I was staring at the empty shadows where the creature had vanished. The next I was fumbling with my keys in the darkness, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice. The Remington still hung from its sling over my shoulder. I hadn't dropped it, hadn't thrown it. Some part of my training had kept me holding on to it, even as my conscious mind checked out. Not that it would have mattered if that thing had decided to follow me. The drive home passed in a blur of headlights and white-knuckled steering. Every shadow between the trees looked like it might be watching me. Every reflection in my mirrors could have been those amber eyes. I kept the radio off, afraid any static might mask the sound of claws on metal. Back in my ranger station apartment, I sat at my kitchen table until dawn, staring at nothing. My supervisor called twice. I'd missed my evening check-in. I told him equipment failure, would file a report tomorrow. The lie came easy. What was I supposed to say? That something impossible was living in those woods? That every missing hiker report suddenly made terrible sense? That was 3 years ago. I've been back to St. Bartholomew's 7 times since then. Always armed, always during daylight. The church looks exactly the same: broken windows, collapsed roof, weeds growing through cracked stone. I found more tracks, always leading away from the building, never toward it. Whatever lives there doesn't want to be found unless it chooses to be. I never filed an incident report. Never told my supervisor what really happened that October evening. The official record shows a routine wildlife survey with no significant findings. Sometimes I wonder if that makes me complicit in the disappearances. I think about those hikers, what they might have done differently, whether they ever saw it coming. I tell myself the creature showed me mercy, that maybe it only kills when threatened, when cornered, but that's probably just what I need to believe so I can sleep at night. The nightmares started a month later. Not of being attacked. The creature never threatened me, not really. No, I dream about those eyes, about the intelligence behind them, the way it studied me like I was something worth understanding. In my dreams, it speaks, asks why I came to its home uninvited. I always wake before I can answer. I keep the shotgun by my door now. Not because it would help, I know better, but because holding it reminds me that there are things in this world that don't follow the rules we understand, things that choose to remain hidden, that could emerge from any shadow if they wanted to. The locals still whisper about dog attacks and missing hikers. I nod along, play the skeptical ranger, suggest bears or coyotes. But I know the truth. Something ancient lives in those woods, something that remembers when these forests stretched unbroken to the horizon. It's still there, watching, still deciding whether we're worth tolerating in its domain. I used to think my job was protecting people from nature. Now I understand it's more complicated than that. Some boundaries shouldn't be crossed. Some places should stay forgotten. The Dogman taught me that much at least.